Hello, everyone. I'm Jane Hansen. This week in the arena, the healthcare debate has been one of the most hotly contested issues of Barack Obama's presidency. Since the bill passed into law, many Republicans and some state governments have challenged the validity and constitutionality of the law itself. At the heart of the matter is the question: does the federal government have the right to force individuals to buy health care? The U.S. Declaration of Independence states certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But should health care be included as a privilege, or is it, in fact, a right? Joining us now are Monsignor Kieran Harrington, the Director of Communications for the Diocese of Brooklyn, and our regular contributors, Elizabeth Scalia, Managing Editor of the Catholic Portal at Patheos.com, and author of the blog, The Anchoress, Grant Gallicho, Associate Editor of Commonweal magazine, and our special guest today, via phone from Albany, Mike Elmendorf, the New York State Director of the National Federation of Independent Business, also known as NFIB. It is the leading small business association representing small and independent businesses. Let us first start with Mike about this whole issue of health care, but can you clear us up a little bit on exactly what it is you guys do and what your position is, Mike?
Sure, absolutely. Well, good morning, Elizabeth, Monsignor, everyone. Thanks for having me. As you mentioned, NFIB is the leading small business advocacy organization, not just in New York, but around the country. And in Albany, in Washington, D.C., and in state capitals around the nation, we're the voice of small business, essentially. We defend the interests and the rights of our members to own, operate, and grow their businesses. And our members are essentially every type of small and independent business you can think of. If you can think of a business or an activity, chances are we've got somebody out there doing it. They're an extraordinary group of people. We represent about 10,000 business owners in New York, and they've got a lot of challenges out there, but it's our privilege to fight for them and be their voice here at the state capitol and in the nation's capital.
And small businesses, of course, are really the backbone of this country. There are more small businesses than there are almost any other kinds of businesses around. So having said that, you have a lot of small businesses who do not have the ability to insure some of their employees. So it would make sense on the surface that this bill, this law, would be good for small businesses. You don't believe that, though?
Well, our members for 20 years have been telling us that their number one concern is health insurance, particularly the cost of health insurance. And you're right. A lot of the uninsured out there are either small business owners or their employees. And it's not because they don't want to provide health insurance. It's not because they feel especially lucky or healthy and don't think they're going to need it. It's because they can't afford it. So you'd have been hard-pressed, I think, to find a group of people more in need of and in favor of real, meaningful health care reform than small business owners. Unfortunately, what we've gotten in this new law is not real effective reform. I mean, it does not reduce the cost of the system. It does not reduce the cost of insurance on small business owners and their employees. It actually restricts the choices and the options that they have in the health insurance market. And as if that's not enough, it's a huge tax increase on small business and many other people. And by the way, we also think it's unconstitutional, and I think we're going to get to that in just a minute.
Grant, you look like you've got something you want to say here.
Mike, are you guys happy with the status quo?
No, absolutely not. I just said that we are in favor of reform, and we were very engaged.
Can you tell me a little bit more about how you think this is going to raise the costs of health care?
It's already doing it. I mean, if you look around the country at what folks have seen with their rates so far, which have been growing out of control, they've accelerated dramatically since this law went into effect.
None of those cost increases are mandated by the bill. In fact, what the bill mandates is that in 2014, there will be state pools where small businesses and self-employed workers can enter, which is expected to cost them less than it does now.
Well, I'll give you one example in terms of the tax side of this law. There's a new tax on health insurance policies. It's structured ostensibly as a fee on insurers, but the way it is enacted, it really applies almost exclusively to the types of plans that small businesses are able to buy. So the small and individual group market is particularly hit by this. This is a fee that doesn't expire. It begins in 2004 at about $8 billion in terms of the fiscal implication, and it keeps going up year after year. And we estimate that on the onset, that alone, that one measure alone, is going to increase the average premium by about $500 a year.
Mike, what is your sense of, I mean, what kind of health reform then would be acceptable for NFIB for small businesses? I mean, to kind of give top line in terms of policies, maybe medical savings accounts. What's really the sorts of broad strokes in terms of reform that NFIB could support and that you think would be good for business?
There are a lot of things. First of all, you can't talk about the cost of health insurance without talking about the cost of care. It's self-evident that they are intrinsically connected. And there is absolutely nothing, rather amazingly, in this bill that deals with reducing the cost of health care. And there are a lot of ways to do that through better use of technology, through medical liability reform. I mean, in New York, we have a real crisis on that score. We have counties in this state where you can't even find a practicing OB or GYN to deliver a baby because doctors have fled the state. We're the only state in the country that has to subsidize the medical malpractice insurance premiums of doctors just to keep them in the state. But there's nothing in this law that goes to the underlying cost drivers that are making health care so much more expensive.
But the president did address in the State of the Union the need for medical tort reform, basically. So he has sort of indicated that he's going to be supportive of efforts to engage tort reform. But even though I'm in favor of tort reform, by most analysis, tort reform is not going to drive down the escalating cost of health care significantly.
I'm not sure that I agree with that. There's analysis that was done, for instance, by New Yorkers for lawsuit reform. There was an independent study that they commissioned that put a huge price tag on the cost of malpractice and the liability system, because you got to understand you're paying for it not only in terms of subsidizing the expense that doctors have to carry such tremendously expensive insurance policies, but you also pay for it through defensive medicine, because it's fact that doctors and other healthcare providers will order procedures and tests that are not necessarily medically necessary, but they're defending themselves against that potential lawsuit because otherwise they could be sunk.
All right, well,
there's a huge cost related to that.
All of that, what you're saying right there, all that makes sense, but I do at some point look upon this law as a work in progress, because we've already had the president talk about tort reform. We've got a number of other issues and some of it hasn't even come into effect yet. I guess my question to you, Mike, is this. Don't you think that what we have at this moment might be the alternative of not having anything?
Well, I think it's being viewed right now by some of those folks in Washington as a work in progress, because it was overwhelmingly repudiated by the American people when they voted in November. The American people opposed this bill when it was before Congress. Congress passed it anyway, and a lot of the people who voted for the bill are no longer in Washington.
But it's also, I mean, we all know how difficult it is to repeal a law once it has actually been enacted. So how reasonable is it that it's going to be repealed?
Well, the House has already voted to do it. We'll see what happens in the Senate. It's obviously a different dynamic in the Senate. And then the other issue that's going on here is the legal challenge to some of the underlying provisions of the law, which we believe exceed Congress's authority under the Constitution. Now, again,
and ultimately, Mike, the Supreme Court's going to address that question, it seems, because the federal court in Florida has kind of forced the issue. So I think that will be good resolution. I guess my concern, and I don't know if this is maybe your underlying concern as well, is one of the things that, in terms of the entire debate, has been that this is really the first step in moving to a single-payer system. That basically that many of the Democrats who are on the more liberal wing were kind of swallowing on this legislation because they saw this as a first step. And actually, part of the reason for opposition or vigorous opposition to the bill was because of a move to a single-payer system, where essentially the government is going to control health care. We're going to go down Pennsylvania Avenue, we're going to see another big building that looks just like the Department of Commerce, except this is going to be the Health Committee.
Right.
And they're going to be making all these decisions. Is that what's really going on? Is that the real concern? Is that the real opposition here?
Not necessarily from us. I mean, certainly our members would not support a single-payer system. I met with a state legislator who couldn't understand why we wouldn't, and my response to him was very simply because our members have already interacted with the government. Thanks. They've seen what it's like, and it's not going to work. And if you look around the world at other countries that have done that and have gone in that direction, a lot of them are moving away from it because it simply is not a system that works. Look, what our members need, what small business needs, is lower cost, more choice, and more competition in the health insurance market. They are treated very differently in the health insurance market than large employers are. They're captured by state-mandated benefits that large employers aren't, so their costs are higher right there. They pay more, about almost 20% on average, for the same coverage compared to a large employer. They're worse off than just about anybody else. They have different tax treatments. So our members need reform. but they're not getting lower cost and more choice and more competition under this bill. They're getting exactly the opposite, and that's why we think it's time to go back to the drawing board, get it right. We are not happy with the status quo. Believe me, our members are struggling, and for almost every one of them, their fastest growing, most out-of-control cost is health insurance. They can't keep up with it, and the result, is that many of them are dropping coverage, not just for their employees, but for the owner of the business, too. That's not good news for anyone. We need to get this right and make things better for folks like that.
What about some of the other parts of this law, though? The tax break incentives, the part about where it stops that job lock, which means people are no longer afraid to leave a job because the thing that had tied them to it was health insurance, when they can go someplace else and maybe be more productive and more challenged and make more money.
Well, the tax credit is interesting. It's one of the things that supporters of this law have talked about a lot in terms of trying to frame this as a positive for small business. When we looked at it very closely, because obviously we would be happy to take anything positive out of this that we can. Here's the thing about the tax credit. Very few businesses are actually going to get it, and we actually have a calculator on our website where business owners can go in and plug in some very top-line information about their business to determine essentially how they would do under this tax credit. It actually penalizes a business for either paying its employees more or adding more employees. So the more you pay your employees or the more your business grows, the more you lose under this tax credit. That is certainly not exactly the kind of economic behavior that you'd think you'd want to incentivize, not hiring people.
Right. So, Mike, what is in the bill that you actually would like, or what are some of the things in the bill that you think could be built upon in a new bill? If you were able to introduce new legislation, what are the provisions in the bill that you like, that you think that could be built upon?
Well, we think, for instance, that the concept of these health insurance exchanges, marketplaces, if you will, where it's easier for consumers, whether they're individuals or employers, to go out and actually look at and cross-shop insurance products, if it's done right. A lot of the execution on a lot of parts of this bills are being punted administratively, or in the case of the exchanges, even potentially to the states. So that's going to look different probably almost in 50 different states. But the underlying concept there is a good one, because it's very difficult for folks like our members to go out and actually shop for health insurance. They don't have a lot of options, and it's if you've done this yourself, it's dizzying. I mean, you don't know what you're getting, and year after year you discover that you're paying more for less, and that's kind of the reality that our folks have been in. So, that makes sense. I think the notion of portability, which I think you talked about, is something that is useful. But really what we need is lower cost and more choice for small employers, because they are one of the biggest single pieces of the folks who are currently being left behind by the existing health insurance market. It doesn't work, but in too many ways, this law is going to make it worse for them.
Grant, you look like you've got something you want to say here.
Yeah, I can't see anybody. I'm at a real disadvantage here.
No, I'm just, I'm wondering whether there are other incentives that small businesses might be able to make up for that were outside of the healthcare bill. I mean, if a small business is being taxed in a way by the healthcare bill, are there other tax incentives outside of this law itself that might compensate?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of different things going on at the federal level. One of the victories that we had was winning extension of the previous tax rates. They're referred to as the Bush tax cuts, although that's not always the most popular name for them. But a lot of small businesses would have faced a significant tax increase had those rates been allowed to expire, and thankfully agreement was reached in a bipartisan way that extended them. That's good news for small business. But you've got to understand, this is all happening in the backdrop of probably the worst economy since the Great Depression. Most small businesses have seen their sales go down dramatically. In New York, in particular, they've seen their taxes go up substantially, and they're already in a state with the worst business tax climate in the country. So it's, at the end of the day, it's a zero-sum game. So when your taxes are going up, when your sales are going down, when your other costs, your energy costs and your health insurance costs are going up year after year, something's got to give. And what happens for small businesses is they can't decide, well, my taxes are just too expensive, I'm not going to pay them. Or my energy bill is too expensive, I'm not going to pay it.
But is it possible, Mike? I mean, one of the big concerns here, as you know, is New York is a very generous state in terms of health insurance, and we have very, very high costs associated with our Medicaid programs. Would this bill kind of reduce the number of people who are on Medicaid right now? Would those health care costs come down so that it would actually be cheaper to do business in the state?
I'm not sure that that's going to be the case at the end of the day at all. I think the jury is still out on that, but I would be very skeptical that would be.
But you would agree that, I mean, we have a very generous program in terms of for women and for children, very high cost. So we have a very generous Medicaid system. It's really the cost driver in the state.
We spend more on Medicaid than Florida and Texas combined, and each of those states have individually more people than New York. So, yeah, I would certainly agree that we're very generous.
Generous would be the word.
Generous
Mike,
would be a euphemism. I think Governor Cuomo may use a different term to describe it these days.
I think so, too. A couple of last words from you, because we do have to run. So give us a final thought on this whole issue.
Well, again, we are firmly in favor of reform, but you've got to do it right. And we think that really the Congress and the President have missed an opportunity with the law that we have now. We hope that we can get folks back to the drawing board to either make some wholesale changes or preferably start over again. There's nothing wrong with doing that. The country's attention is focused on the issue, and I think that's an opportunity for everybody that agrees that there needs to be reform. But we think it's more important to do it right than to just do something. I'm not sure that's what Congress was thinking when they did this last year, but we hope that there's going to be some significant changes here that will make this situation a lot better for America's small business owners. All
right. Well, you are quite the spokesperson for them. We thank you so much, Mike Elmendorf.
Thank you very much.
Speaking to us from Albany today from the NFIB. We're going to take a break for just a moment, but we want to remind you that you can weigh in on our discussion anytime by going to our website at hyperlink, which is netny.net/inthearena, and then click on Enter the Arena. We always welcome your questions and your comments, and we, of course, will be right back. Welcome back, everyone, as we continue our discussion on the health care law and its implications. And you know what? I want to bring this down to kind of personal experience here, because all the people that are watching this, we can talk about it in any large-scale terms you want to, but the bottom line is people may or may not be paying more for health insurance, maybe still be uninsured, and the costs are still extremely high. Elizabeth. Start with you. I know you have your own businesses.
I have my own business, but I'm very fortunate. My husband works for a corporation, and they have an insurance plan. Unfortunately, since the passage of this bill, they've switched to a different insurance provider. So we have basically lost all of our doctors because none of them liked the new insurance, which was also $2,500 a year more expensive for us. So we felt like as soon as this bill passed, we had a 1-2 punch of no, we didn't get to keep our doctors that we liked so much that, you know, had been with me for 25 years,
exactly.
Yeah. And also the out-of-pocket expenses just ballooned.
Which seems, in a certain sense, that it goes almost against the basics of this bill, which at the bottom, in the heart of it, I am hoping is let's make sure that everybody gets good health care. And your health care may have been, impacted just simply because of the fact that those doctors are no longer there to take care of you.
To be honest with you, the doctors that I'm checking out now don't seem to me to be people I feel very confident about. And I really wish that I could go back to my old doctors. I miss them very much. I was confident in the care I was getting there. So,
this is the same sort of thing that the credit card companies did when the reforms about fees were announced. They raised fees in the period until the law cracking down on those gouging fees went into effect. So the insurance companies see a future in which they won't be able to price gouge. And until the law goes completely into effect, they're going to try to squeeze as much from us as they can. And that's why
see a future where they will no longer exist.
Okay, well, just let me finish. If you could just so what's happening here is that the Health and Human Services Office is actually looking into these price gougings by very large insurers. I mean, this is a problem. If it becomes the case that Congress cannot enact laws that protect consumers because the window during which, between passage and the effective law means that these companies are going to gouge consumers, then we have a serious problem.
But I think that this is really a fundamental question in terms of what are the problems that government can solve? And that's one of the, I think it's a really a philosophical question, but it is something which I think plays into this discussion. Because while I think you're right, Grant, I mean, basically the market is always going to find ways to make money. People are always going to find ways to make money. And so they're going to look for discrepancies in terms of what's the way in which they can make money legally. And so I think that that's just the way this is going to go because that's the nature of a capitalist system.
Okay,
and
but that's going to
happen.
Yeah, but that's going to happen in any kind of situation, no matter what the subject matter is, be it healthcare or be it credit
you're
cards.
right.
But I think what makes this particularly insulting to consumers is that when the healthcare bill goes into effect fully, the health insurance companies are going to get rich. I mean, they have come around on this. They see a larger market for their products.
Because there's going to be millions and millions more people that will actually have health insurance that are even
But there are some real serious the questions about whether or not the government can compel somebody to purchase anything. The federal government compel an individual to buy something.
Yeah, like say Medicare.
Wait. So
Well,
next you're going to say, oh, we're all compelled to buy car insurance. The truth is, okay, yes, we are, but we don't all have to drive.
But we do all have to pay for Medicare.
We do all have to
And
breathe.
we do all have to get sick and die.
ultimately we will. That's true.
But you're still not compelled to buy a product.
Yeah,
we're never compelled to buy
I
a
am.
product.
I'm compelled to buy Medicare.
Wait, let's twist this around the other way then.
Wait a minute,
What about?
you shouldn't feel bad about that.
No, I don't.
But then what are you complaining about?
I'm not.
He's a proponent.
I don't feel bad about.
What do
I
you
don't
want me
feel
to buy
bad
for
about
you
my
today?
taxes.
I'll buy you lunch.
I don't feel bad about my taxes going toward Medicare. I don't feel bad about that at all. I think that you need to give people a hand up, and I think that the government does have. You asked the question earlier about is it a right or is it
Right, which is where I was just going right now until I got so rudely interrupted.
I'm sorry.
I'm kidding.
But now I'm Irish, so no. But
The Christian part about this.
the Christian part of us, right? Okay. I think that we need to always keep in mind that there are people out there who need medical care. It may not be a right, so to speak, but it's certainly something that the government has an obligation to look into. But I honestly think, and I've always felt, that this bill tried to do too much for too many people instead of just focusing on the people who were truly in need.
You know what's a curious thing, and I'd be curious to Grant because I know you're a supporter of the legislation. But one of the things that does kind of particularly gall me is the Stupak Amendment. I mean, obviously there was a sizable number of pro-life Democrats who really had difficulties with provisions in this bill, which seemed to think that that tax dollars were going to be going to fund abortion. That Stupak Amendment was proposed as a way of kind of addressing that issue, and the Democrats in the last Congress opposed the Stupak Amendment. I mean, and in fact, I mean, you know, Bart retires from Congress.
You mean the Democrats who were not pro-life?
Those who are opposed to. But I mean, clearly, this was a way of bringing people together. What happened on that piece of legislation? And I know your paper, your magazine has taken a pretty strong position saying that the Stupak Amendment is not really necessary. So can you maybe address that issue? Because I know it's galling to me, to the USCCB, others.
Very briefly, there were some legal scholars who questioned whether the Stupak Amendment would pass constitutional muster because it would create a burden on women who the Supreme Court has said have a right to get any kind of abortion. So there was that piece of it. And then once the president agreed to sign that executive order saying that no federal funding would go toward abortion, that satisfied Stupak, which in turn, I think, annoyed a lot of his supporters. But I think we'll see. At this point, it's not clear to me whether federal funding will go toward elective abortions.
But you could see there would be reason for opposition on that basis alone.
I can see why there's confusion.
There is a lot of confusion. We are not going to solve it here right now,
Shouldn't
and
pass
mostly
confusing
because we have to take a break. We will be right back. I want to remind you, you can weigh in on our discussion anytime by going to our website, netny.net//in-the-arena. Click on Enter the Arena. We'll be back in a second. Conversation on the issue of the health care law. Monsignor, let's just talk about this in terms of human beings within the Catholic Church. You guys have problems paying health insurance bills.
I think I can tell you from my perspective, it's a huge cost to a parish, and yet it's a matter of justice. That people have families they have to take care of, and so it's a major cost. Our newspaper has 20 retirees that we provide medical. We provide health insurance as a legacy cost to. Huge cost to our paper. It required really basically us to lay off almost 13, 14 people. So healthcare is a major driver of expenses in any business, at least for us.
Okay, so then let's take a look at, we've got a healthcare reform law, and you are not in favor of it, and yet it's something that will, it's on its surface, it's supposed to help those bills. So how do you do?
I don't know if it will, and again, I go back. We just concluded the last segment by saying there's a lot of confusion here. Here's the deal: legislation that gets passed should not be confusing. It should be pretty clear what are the expectations. And when you pass legislation that is confusing and complicated and that there are a lot of unanswered questions, a lot of bad things can happen. When my business, we can't afford that because we have such thin margins that if something goes wrong, it puts us out of business.
That also brings up the point about the waivers. I was looking this morning at the latest waiver numbers. I think we're up to 739 waivers to Obamacare for businesses and unions and I guess friends of friends who are not obliged to participate in Obamacare at this time. And I think anytime you pass legislation that requires unions and other people to get waivers from it, you have something questionable going on.
Grant?
There are two important pieces of this law. One is that it forces the market to grow so that healthy people are in the insurance pool with sick people. That, in turn, is the second part, will drive costs down. That is the only way to control healthcare costs. Yes, this was a big, expensive, confusing bill, but there's no way to tackle the problem of healthcare in this country without a big bill.
Last thoughts?
It should be smaller. I don't know if it can be repealed, and I don't know if it should be repealed, but I certainly think there needs to be enormous amounts of legislation correcting what has been put in place.
Monsignor? You get the last word.
Diocese pays about $14,000 a year for my health care. I'd rather they just give me the money, let me put it into a medical savings account, and let me spend it as I need to do. Over the course of my life, that's a lot of money. It would be very helpful. I could buy catastrophic health insurance, but I could pay for that money on a go as pay-as-you-go basis. It would be much better. I'd love to see us get to medical savings accounts.
All right. And that's it for us. Thank you all so much for being with us again. Thank you, Grant. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Monsignor. And thank you. Remember that you don't need a television to watch the net. We are always online at netny.net. For all of us here, I'm Jane Hansen. We'll see you next time in the arena.